The velvet curtains of the sapphire room hung heavy against floor-to-ceiling windows, filtering the Chicago night into something softer than it deserved to be. Inside, crystal chandeliers scattered amber light across white linen, and the low hum of jazz piano mixed with the careful clink of expensive stemware. The air smelled of seared wagyu, truffle oil, and money, the kind that didn't ask for checks, just sign them. This was where Chicago's elite came to be seen, where business that would never touch a courtroom was negotiated over aged scotch. Teresa Smith moved through the maze of tables with practiced efficiency, her tray balanced with the kind of muscle memory that came from too many double shifts. At 24, she had perfected the art of being invisible. Dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, minimal makeup, and a uniform that made her forgettable. Her brown eyes noticed everything, the impatient finger at table 9, the empty bread basket at 12, but she made sure nothing noticed her back. She preferred it that way. "Excuse me." A woman dripping in diamonds lifted one manicured hand. "Is the risotto dairy-free?" Teresa smiled, though her feet ached in second-hand flats. "I can have the chef prepare it with vegetable stock, ma'am. About 12 minutes." The woman waved dismissively. "Never mind. The branzino." Teresa turned toward the kitchen, her mind already calculating. 73 hours this week. After rent and the minimum payment on her father's medical debt, maybe $200 left. Still not enough. $47,000 and counting. "Teresa, table 6 needs water," called Marcus, the other server. On it. Table 6 was tucked into the back corner, partially hidden by frosted glass and dark wood. As Teresa approached, she noticed the 3 men seated there for the first time. Something about them immediately set her instincts on edge. The man at the center was younger than the usual clientele, early 30s, with dark hair styled away from a face that could have been carved from stone. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, and a watch that caught the light like captured starlight. But it wasn't the expensive clothes that made her pause. It was the absolute stillness. He sat like someone who had never questioned his command of any room he entered. The 2 men flanking him, both built like professional athletes, with the telltale bulge of shoulder holsters beneath their jackets, watched the restaurant with lethal precision. Teresa had grown up in Pilsen. She knew what she was looking at. "Water?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. The man in the center looked up, and Teresa felt the impact of those eyes, pale gray, the color of winter storms, seeing straight through every wall she'd ever built. Then he smiled, and the room shifted. "Please." His voice was quiet, controlled, dangerous. "And we'll need a few more minutes." "Of course." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Teresa." He repeated it slowly, testing it. "Teresa." His gaze held hers 1 second too long. "Thank you, Teresa." She walked away, but she could feel his eyes on her skin. Warm, dangerous, captivating. He wasn't just feared. He was a storm wearing a suit. And she never expected danger and destiny to meet in the same room. This was the night everything changed for both of them. 20 minutes later, Teresa was refilling wine glasses at table 12 when Marcus appeared at her elbow, his expression somewhere between confused and annoyed. "The guy at 6 wants you specifically," he said. "Says he needs help with his car, or something. I told him I could handle it, but he insisted." Teresa's stomach tightened. "His car? Yeah. Weird, right?" Marcus shrugged. "Rich people." She found Richard Moore standing near the partition, his bodyguards flanking him like silent sentinels. Up close, he was even more imposing, taller than she'd realized, with shoulders that filled out his suit in a way that suggested violence wrapped in expensive fabric. "Teresa." He said her name like he'd been practicing it. "I need you to escort me to the parking garage. There's an issue with my vehicle." It was a thin excuse. They both knew it. "Sir, I can call the valet." "I'm asking you." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of someone who didn't repeat himself. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyes said everything. She should have refused. Should have made an excuse, called Marcus, done anything except nod and follow him toward the service elevator that led to the underground garage. But she didn't. The two bodyguards moved ahead of them, scanning the hallway with professional paranoia. Richard walked beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive that made her think of leather and smoke. "You're observant," he said as they reached the elevator. It wasn't a question. It's part of the job.
No.
He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Teresa felt her breath catch. Most people see what they want to see. You see what's actually there. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. They stepped inside, and Teresa watched the numbers descend.
B1.
B2. B3. She could feel his gaze on her skin. Warm. Dangerous. Captivating. "Why did you really ask me to come with you?" she asked, surprising herself. Richard's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Because I don't trust easily. And right now you're safer with me than up there." Before Teresa could process that, the elevator doors opened onto the parking garage. The air hit her immediately, cold, heavy with the smell of concrete and exhaust. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows between the rows of expensive cars. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the echo of their footsteps. Richard's bodyguards tensed instantly, their hands moving toward their jackets. Every shadow held a threat he couldn't ignore. Teresa's instinct screamed. Something was wrong. The garage was too quiet, too empty for this time of night. She saw it in the way Richard's jaw tightened, the way his bodyguards shifted into defensive positions. "Stay close," Richard said, his voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. And then the shadows moved. The first shot shattered the silence like breaking glass. Richard's bodyguard to the left, the one with the scar above his eyebrow, dropped instantly, blood blooming across his white shirt before his body hit the concrete. The second bodyguard managed to draw his weapon, but 3 muzzle flashes erupted from behind a black SUV, and he crumpled beside a support pillar. Richard moved on pure instinct, his hand clamping around Teresa's wrist as he pulled her behind a concrete column. Her back hit the rough surface hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. "Don't move," he commanded, his voice deadly calm even as gunfire echoed through the garage like thunder in a canyon. Teresa's heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening.
But it was.
Men emerged from the shadows. 5, maybe 6, all dressed in black, all armed. They moved with military precision, fanning out to cut off the exits. One wrong move, and everything would collapse. "Richard Moore." The voice came from a man stepping into the flickering fluorescent light. He was older, silver-haired, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left to weather. "You should have accepted Constantine's offer." Richard said nothing. His hand remained on Teresa, keeping her pinned behind him, shielded by his body. "The Volkov Syndicate sends its regards," the silver-haired man continued, raising his weapon with professional efficiency. "Nothing personal. Just business." Teresa felt Richard's muscles coil beneath his suit jacket. She could see the calculation in his posture. 3 men to the left, 2 to the right, 1 directly ahead. No bodyguards. No backup. No way out. In his world, trust was currency, and betrayal was death. "Killing me starts a war," Richard said, his voice carrying across the concrete expanse with absolute authority. "Constantine knows this." The silver-haired man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The war already started. You just didn't realize you'd lost." Another figure stepped from behind a Mercedes, younger, eager, his weapon already trained on Richard's chest. Then another from the stairwell. Another from behind the elevator. They were surrounded. Teresa's mind raced, cataloging details the way she'd been trained to notice everything. The hitmen were professionals, but they were also confident. Too confident. They'd positioned themselves in a circle. Yes, but that meant crossfire. That meant... "Any last words?" the silver-haired man asked, his finger moving to the trigger. Richard's hand tightened on Teresa's arm. She could feel his heartbeat through the fabric of his suit, steady, controlled. Even now. Stay close, he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. Enemies watched. Always. The silver-haired man took aim, and Teresa saw the fallen bodyguard's gun, lying on the oily concrete 3 feet away, still within reach. Time fractured into crystalline moments. The silver-haired man's finger tightened on the trigger. Richard's body tensed, ready to shield her even though it would cost him everything. And Teresa stopped thinking entirely. Her hand shot out, fingers closing around the grip of the fallen bodyguard's weapon. The metal was still warm, slick with blood and oil. She'd never held a gun before. Never wanted to. But her father had grown up in Pilsen in the 70s, and he'd made sure she knew how they worked, just in case. Just in case turned out to be now. Teresa raised the weapon with both hands, her arms shaking, her heart threatening to burst through her chest. The silver-haired man's eyes widened, surprise, then calculation, then the beginning of a pivot toward her. She pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed through her shoulders. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a crack that echoed off concrete and steel. The silver-haired man stumbled backward, his weapon clattering to the ground as he clutched his shoulder, then his chest, then collapsed against the SUV before sliding to the concrete. For one suspended heartbeat, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. Richard lunged forward, his arm wrapping around Teresa's waist as he yanked her down behind the concrete pillar. Return fire exploded around them, bullets sparking off metal, punching through car windows, embedding themselves in concrete with sharp cracks. Stay down, Richard commanded, his body covering hers, shielding her from the spray of gunfire. Teresa couldn't breathe.
Couldn't think.
Her hands still gripped the gun, her entire body trembling with adrenaline and terror, and something else she couldn't name. More shots. Shouting. The screech of tires echoing from the entrance ramp. Reinforcements. But whose? Richard pulled back just enough to look at her, his pale gray eyes burning with an intensity that made her forget the bullets, forget everything except the man above her. You have no idea what you just saved me from. Before she could respond, 3 black SUVs screamed into the garage, doors flying open. Men in tactical gear poured out. Richard's men, Teresa realized through the fog of shock, and the remaining hitmen scattered like roaches in sudden light. Richard was moving, pulling her up, his hand iron tight around her wrist. Blood stained his shirt, his bodyguard's, not his own. He reached into his jacket and pressed something into her palm. A card. Heavy stock, embossed lettering. Stay close, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. His eyes held hers. They'll come for you now. When they do, call that number. I don't. Call it. It wasn't a request. His men were surrounding him, pulling him toward the vehicles. One of them, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his jaw, was already scanning her face, memorizing it. Richard looked back once as they loaded him into the SUV. Their eyes met across the blood-stained concrete, across the body of the man she'd shot, across the impossible distance that had just closed between their worlds. Then he was gone, and Teresa was alone in the garage with a gun in one hand and a business card in the other. Her life, as she knew it, had just ended. If you believe true courage is acting even when terrified, hit the like button. Only the cowards will scroll past. 3 days after the parking garage, Teresa watched her own face flash across the muted television screen in a motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Person of interest in downtown shooting. The Chiron read beneath grainy security footage that showed her raising a gun, firing, running. The news anchor's lips moved silently, but Teresa didn't need sound to know what they were saying. Waitress. Shooting. Organized crime. Investigation ongoing. She'd been moving every night. Different motels, different neighborhoods, always paying cash from the emergency fund she'd been saving for her father's debt. The Starlight Inn on Monday. The Gateway Motor Lodge on Tuesday. Tonight, the Riverside Motel, $43 a night, rust stains in the bathtub, and a door lock that wouldn't stop anyone who really wanted in. Her phone buzzed for the 100th time. More messages from Marcus, from her landlord, from numbers she didn't recognize. She'd stopped reading them after the first day. The business card Richard had given her sat on the nightstand, the embossed lettering catching the flickering neon from the motel sign outside. Just a phone number. No name. No explanation. She hadn't called it. A knock on the door made her heart slam against her ribs. Miss Smith. The voice was professional, controlled.
FBI.
We need to talk. Teresa approached the peephole. Two agents, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a younger man with a badge clipped to his belt. Real badges. Real agents. She opened the door, but kept the chain latched. You're in danger, the woman said without preamble. We've identified the men from the parking garage. Volkov Syndicate. Russian organized crime. They've put a price on your head, $200,000. The number hit Teresa like a physical blow. We're offering witness protection, the woman continued. New identity, relocation, full federal support. But you need to come with us now. What about my life? Teresa's voice cracked. My apartment, my job, my father's debt. Gone. The male agent's tone wasn't unkind, just honest. All of it. That's what witness protection means. You disappear completely or you die. She felt seen, and that terrified her. For 24 years, Teresa had been invisible. She'd perfected it, mastered it, built her entire existence around not being noticed, not being remembered, not mattering enough to anyone to become a target. Now her face was on the news. Hitmen were hunting her. And the federal government wanted to erase her completely. New name, new city, new life. No degree. No debt paid. No future that belonged to her. I need time to think, she whispered. You don't have time, the female agent said. Every hour you wait, they get closer. Teresa closed the door, locked it, and slid down against the wood until she was sitting on the stained carpet. She was a target in a war she didn't choose. And the only person who could protect her from it was the storm in a suit she'd saved 3 nights ago. Her hand reached for the business card. Teresa made it 2 more days before she ran out of cash and options. The Park View Motel, which had a view of neither a park nor anything remotely pleasant, was her last stop. $38 a night, cockroaches in the bathroom, and a parking lot where she'd watched 2 drug deals go down in the past hour. She was counting the remaining bills from her dwindling emergency fund when headlights swept across her window. A black town car pulled into the lot, too clean, too expensive for this neighborhood. Her blood turned to ice. Teresa grabbed the only weapon she had, a rusted tire iron she'd found in the motel office, and moved toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw a man step out of the town car. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running down his jaw that she recognized from the parking garage. Richard's man. The knock was professional. Patient. Miss Smith. My name is Victor Kozlov. I work for Richard Moore. I'm not here to hurt you. Teresa's grip tightened on the tire iron. How did you find me? Mr. Moore has resources the FBI doesn't. Victor's voice carried the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language. And unlike them, we're not broadcasting your location to every criminal network in the city. Fair point. Teresa opened the door but stayed in the frame, tire iron visible. Victor's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked almost impressed. The bounty is now $300,000. It went up yesterday after the Volkov Syndicate confirmed their man died. They want you dead, Miss Smith. Slowly. The FBI offered witness protection. And you're still here. Victor's eyes were dark, calculating. Which tells me you're smart enough to know that witness protection is a cage with different bars. New name, new city, but still trapped. Still in debt. Still invisible. He wasn't wrong. Mr. Moore sent me to make you an offer. His protection. His resources. A job, if you want it. And full payment of your father's debt. $47,312 as of this morning. Teresa's breath caught. He knew. Down to the dollar. Why? She whispered. Why does he care? Victor's expression softened slightly. Because you saved his life when you had every reason to run. Because you see things other people don't. And because, he paused, choosing his words carefully, Mr. Moore doesn't forget debts. especially ones he owes. Teresa looked at the tire iron in her hand, then at the roach crawling across the wall behind Victor, then at the business card she'd been carrying for 5 days. The FBI wanted to erase her. The Volkov syndicate wanted to kill her. And Richard Moore, the dangerous, impossible man she'd saved, wanted to protect her. She hated how much she wanted him to keep her safe. Hated that her fear was outweighed by something far more dangerous. The police can't stop this, Victor continued quietly. Federal agents can't stop this. But we can. Teresa met his eyes. What does he want in return? Your trust, your eyes, and your willingness to walk into his world. She thought of her father.
The debt.
The years of invisibility that had gotten her nowhere except deeper into poverty and exhaustion. I'll go with you, she said. Victor nodded once. Smart choice. Teresa was trapped by poverty and debt. If you believe everyone deserves control over their own destiny, hit subscribe. Only those who don't care about others' struggles won't. The safe house wasn't what Teresa expected. She'd imagined something cold and industrial, concrete walls, security cameras, the sterile functionality of a panic room. Instead, Victor's town car pulled up to a restored brownstone in Lincoln Park, with ivy climbing the brick facade and floor-to-ceiling windows that glowed warm against the evening darkness. Inside was even more surprising. Hardwood floors, exposed brick, furniture that looked like it belonged in an art gallery. A kitchen with marble countertops. A bedroom upstairs with a king-sized bed and windows overlooking a private garden. Mr. Moore will be here shortly, Victor said, setting her single duffel bag, everything she owned, on the leather sofa. There's food in the kitchen. Clothes in your size in the closet upstairs. Don't open the doors or windows without clearance. 2 men are posted outside at all times. Then he was gone, and Teresa was alone in a home worth more than she'd earn in a lifetime. She'd just stepped out of the shower, wearing one of the silk robes she'd found in the closet, when she heard the front door open. Richard Moore walked in like he owned the place. Because he probably did. He looked different than he had in the parking garage. The violence was still there, coiled beneath his expensive suit, but there was something else now. Exhaustion, maybe, or the weight of command that never lifted. His pale gray eyes found her immediately, scanning her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. You came, he said quietly. I didn't have much choice. You always have a choice. He moved closer, and Teresa felt her heart rate spike. You could have taken the FBI's offer, gone into hiding, disappeared, and spent the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. You'll do that anyway. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, leather and smoke and something darker. But at least with me, you'll know who's watching. Their closeness felt dangerous and irresistible. Why am I really here? Teresa asked, forcing herself to hold his gaze. Victor said you need my help, but you have an entire organization. That's the problem. Richard's jaw tightened. Someone in my organization set up that hit. Someone I trust. Someone close enough to know my schedule, my routes, my security protocols. Understanding dawned cold in Teresa's chest. And you can't trust anyone to help you find them. Except you. He reached out, his fingers brushing her jaw in a touch so light it could have been imagined. You see things, Teresa. You saw my bodyguards were armed when everyone else saw dinner guests. You saw the ambush coming before my own men did. So, you want me to spy for you. I want you to survive. His voice dropped, commanding and soft at once. Don't be afraid, not of me. But she was afraid. Not of him, of the way her body responded when he stood this close. Of the heat building between them that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with desire. There's a dinner in 3 days, Richard continued, his hand still cradling her face. My inner circle. Capos, lieutenants, family. I need you there. I need your eyes. And if I find them, his smile was cold. Then they stop being a problem. He stepped back, and Teresa felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. Get some rest, he said. You're mine to protect now. And I always protect what's mine. The next 2 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Teresa learned the layout of the brownstone, memorized the faces of Richard's security team, and tried not to think about the fact that her entire life had been reduced to a duffel bag and a debt that was somehow already paid. On the morning of the dinner, Richard arrived with a leather portfolio and a jeweler's box. "Your new identity," he said, setting the portfolio on the dining table. "Teresa Romano. My cousin's daughter from Naples. Recently moved to Chicago to study art history at Northwestern." Teresa opened the portfolio to find a perfectly forged passport, driver's license, and university ID. The photos were hers. When had they taken these? But the name was someone else's. And this? Richard opened the jeweler's box to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant. Recording device. The pendant activates with pressure. Wear it at all times tonight. He moved behind her to fasten it, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck. Teresa's breath hitched. "There are 15 people who knew my schedule that night," Richard said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "One of them wanted me dead. I need you to watch how they interact with me. Who defers? Who challenges? Who's too comfortable or not comfortable enough? That's a lot of pressure for someone who's never done this before." "I know." His hands rested on her shoulders, and Teresa felt the weight of them. Protective, possessive, impossibly gentle. "But I trust you more than I trust anyone in that room." She turned to face him, and the movement brought them dangerously close. His pale gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made the rest of the world disappear. "Why?" she whispered. "You barely know me. I know you saved my life when you could have run. I know you're here instead of in witness protection. I know." He stopped, something raw flickering across his face. "I know you see me. Not the reputation, not the money or the power. Just me." He leaned in, slow and deliberate, until she could feel his breath against her lips. Every time he stepped closer, her breath vanished. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. Teresa's hands trembled, not from fear, but from wanting him closer.
She should stop this.
Should step back. Should remember that he was dangerous, that his world was violence, that getting close to him meant walking into fire. But she didn't move. "You don't know what you've done to me," Richard said, his voice breaking in a way that suggested he never let it break for anyone else. "I don't trust anyone. I can't afford to. But you." His forehead touched hers. "You're the only thing that calms me." His vulnerability was a weapon more dangerous than any gun. "Richard, I know this is insane. I know you should run. I know I'm not good for you." His hands framed her face. "But I need you tonight. And I need you safe. And I need you to understand that once you walk into that room as mine, there's no going back." Teresa met his eyes. "As yours? As mine?" It wasn't a question. The air between them tightened, charged with everything unspoken. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. Richard stepped back, his mask sliding into place with practiced ease. "The car leaves in an hour," he said. "Wear the black dress in your closet." "And Teresa?" He paused at the door. "Stay close to me tonight. Always." In his world, trust was currency, and betrayal was death. Comment, "I stand for loyalty," if you can't stand being betrayed by people you trust. The restaurant was called Dante's, and it existed in that shadowy space where legitimate business and the underworld shook hands over expensive wine. Teresa walked in on Richard's arm, wearing a black dress that fit like it had been tailored specifically for her, because it had. Diamond earrings that were probably real. Heels that made her legs look longer and made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. The private room in the back was already full when they arrived. 15 men, just as Richard had said. Some young, some old, all watching with the particular intensity of predators assessing a newcomer in their territory. Enemies watched. Always. "Gentlemen," Richard said, his hand resting possessively on Teresa's lower back. "This is Teresa Romano, my cousin's daughter. She'll be staying in Chicago for the foreseeable future." The introductions blurred together. Marco, the one with the thick Brooklyn accent. Dimitri, who looked like he could bend steel with his bare hands. Anthony, young and ambitious, with too much gel in his hair. And Uncle Luca. He sat at Richard's right hand, older than the others, with silver hair and a face that suggested he'd seen and done things that would keep normal people awake at night. He smiled when Richard introduced them, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to the family, Teresa," Luca said, his accent pure Chicago Italian. Any cousin of Richard's is family. They sat. Wine was poured. Plates of food appeared, antipasti, pasta, osso buco that smelled incredible and tasted like ashes in Teresa's mouth because she couldn't stop cataloging everything. The conversation flowed around her. Business talk disguised as family gossip. Territory disputes framed as real estate investments. Richard held court from the head of the table, his voice calm and commanding, and Teresa watched. She watched how Marco spoke directly to Richard, confident and easy. She watched how Dimitri asked questions without hesitation. She watched how Anthony deferred, but only to Richard. And she watched how every other man at the table, subtle, almost imperceptible, glanced at Uncle Luca before they answered Richard's questions. It was a pattern.
A tell.
The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd spent years reading people for tips, for threats, for the tiny signals that meant the difference between a good shift and a dangerous one. When Richard asked about the port shipments, Marco started to answer. Then his eyes flicked to Luca. Only for a second. But it was there. When Richard questioned the North Side territory, Dimitri opened his mouth, then looked to Luca first. They weren't taking orders from Richard. They were waiting for Luca's approval. Teresa's hand found Richard's under the table. She squeezed once, then traced letters against his palm with her finger. Luca. She felt Richard go absolutely still beside her. The room continued its careful dance of conversation and wine and lies, but the air between them tightened. Richard's face remained impassive, but Teresa could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, could feel the coiled violence in his body. He turned to look at his uncle, really look at him, and Luca met his gaze with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. "Uncle Luca," Richard said quietly, and the room went silent. "Tell me about the parking garage." Luca's smile never wavered, but his eyes did. And Teresa knew she was right. Teresa didn't see Richard for 3 days after the dinner. Victor came instead, his expression unreadable as he delivered meals, checked the security perimeter, and said nothing about what had happened to Uncle Luca. But Teresa knew. She'd seen enough in her old neighborhood to recognize the particular silence that followed when someone powerful disappeared. On the 4th night, Richard finally came.
He looked exhausted.
His suit jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was something raw in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he had the right to enter, despite owning the building. "It's done," he said quietly. "Luca's gone. The Volkov contract is void. You're safe." Teresa set down the book she'd been pretending to read. "How do you know the contract's void?" "Because I made sure of it." His smile was cold. "Konstantin Volkov, and I came to an understanding. He gives up his claim on you, or I dismantle his entire operation brick by brick." And he agreed? He's pragmatic. And he knows I don't bluff. Richard moved into the room, but he kept his distance, as if afraid to get too close. "Your father's debt was paid 5 days ago. The full amount, plus interest. The collection agency has closed your file. You're free." Teresa's throat tightened. Free. From the debt, yes. He met her eyes then, and the vulnerability she saw there stole her breath. "But I can't." He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "I wasn't supposed to feel this." "Feel what?"
"This."
He gestured between them, frustrated, searching for words. "I built my life on control. On certainty. On never letting anyone close enough to matter. And then you grabbed that gun, and everything changed." He closed the distance between them in 3 strides. "You're the only thing that calms me," Richard said, his voice rough. "The only person I trust in a world where trust gets you killed." I tried to walk away. Tried to convince myself that paying your debt and keeping you safe was enough. But it's not. His hands framed her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. "I need you to understand what this means," he continued. "The debt is paid, but my protection is permanent. You're not trapped here. You can leave, build whatever life you want. But whether you're in this house or across the country, you're mine to protect. Always. Yours," Teresa repeated softly. "Mine." It was a claim, a promise, a threat, and a vow all at once. She should have been afraid. Should have run from the possessiveness in his voice, from the dangerous world he represented. But when he pulled her close, when his lips finally met hers with all the pent-up tension of the past 2 weeks, all she felt was safe. And seen. And dangerously, irresistibly wanted. "Stay," Richard whispered against her mouth. "Not because you're in danger. Not because you owe me. Stay because you want to." Teresa looked into those pale gray eyes and saw everything she'd been running from her entire life. Visibility, vulnerability, the terrifying risk of mattering to someone. "I'll stay," she said. His smile transformed his entire face. "Then you're home." And for the first time since her father died, Teresa believed it. Richard tried to walk away, but couldn't. If you love a story with deep emotional stakes and you believe that people who help others deserve to be protected and safe, please hit subscribe. Don't suppress that feeling.